We don't fight for honor, we fight to win. The humans who changed the galaxy's battle strategy, it was a cold and silent journey through the void. A silence that only the vastest stretches of space could impose on travelers. The Endurance, a ship that had traversed galaxies and dimensions, sailed through the stars, its sleek form reflecting the distant pinpricks of light beyond. Inside the vessel, the crew prepared for another mission, another conquest. Among them was Garik, a Tarak warrior of considerable renown, a being who had spent his life perfecting his strength in the arena of battle. His people, the Tarak, were feared across the multiverse for their unmatched fighting prowess. The galaxy's strongest warriors, they were known for overwhelming their enemies with sheer physical dominance, and Garik was their pride. Yet, despite the size and power of the Tarak, Garik found himself unsettled as his eyes flicked across the transport's cabin, landing on the humans sitting in the back. Sergeant Miles and his team appeared completely disinterested in the mission. They sat there, still and silent, as if the war raging outside didn't concern them. Their presence seemed a stark contrast to the bustling, anxious energy of the Tarak warriors preparing for battle. "Why do they always sit in the back?" Garik murmured to his second-in-command, Jorik, who was sitting nearby. "They should be preparing for battle just like the rest of us. Are they afraid?" Jorik, looking equally puzzled, nodded in agreement. "They've always been like this, Garik. Ever since we met them, they've avoided the front. I think they fear us, and rightly so." Garik grunted in response. The Tarak had always prided themselves on their strength. The thought of anyone, let alone the humans, acting so nonchalant in the face of combat was a direct challenge to the very core of their beliefs. But Garik didn't give it another thought. After all, the mission ahead was simple enough. There was a planet on the edge of a new galaxy that needed to be taken. And it would be easy, as it always was. The Tarak would charge, they would overpower the enemy, and they would win. The journey stretched on, the distant stars offering little in terms of comfort. Garik found himself restless, his thoughts circling back to the humans. They had been allies, yes, but he had always been skeptical of their strange calmness. They were useful, no doubt, but there was something about them that unsettled him. It wasn't fear he felt, no, Garik did not fear anyone, but rather something more complicated. It was as though they were waiting for something Garik didn't understand. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was the only sound filling the cabin when suddenly, the silence was broken by the shrill sound of the alarm system. The crew rushed to their positions, preparing for combat. Garik's pulse quickened, his mind snapping into the familiar pattern of battle readiness. Yet, as he moved to the front, he couldn't help but glance back at the humans. Miles stood slowly, his expression unreadable, while his team followed his lead. They didn't panic. They didn't rush. They simply moved, calmly and methodically, as if they had already anticipated what was about to happen. And then it came. A flash, too quick for the sensors to pick up in time, followed by an explosion that rocked the ship. The crew staggered, but Garik kept his footing, his hand tightening around the hilt of his weapon. What had happened? There was no time for confusion. The ship was under attack. Enemy vessels, slick and menacing, emerged from the shadows of the nearby star system, their forms obscured by a distortion in the fabric of space itself. These ships were unlike anything Garik had seen before. They moved with unnatural speed, coordinated, agile, a terrifying contrast to the brute force of the Tarak warriors. "Battle stations!" Garik barked, his voice gruff with the weight of years spent in battle. The Tarak immediately rushed to their posts, their weapons drawn and ready. Garik himself leaped to the front, a massive blaster in hand, eager to show the enemies the full might of the Tarak. But something was wrong. Despite the ferocity of their strikes, the enemy didn't seem fazed. Their weapons seemed to slip through the Tarak's defenses, avoiding their attacks with eerie precision. Garik's frustration mounted as he saw his warriors falter. For the first time in his life, Garik felt something unfamiliar, doubt. Was this really the fight he had imagined? And then, as though the universe had conspired to push him further into his confusion, Garik saw something that made his blood run cold. The humans in the back, still calm, were moving, but they didn't rush into the fray. They didn't charge forward with reckless abandon. They moved silently, strategically, as if they had already planned every action before it had even begun. In a matter of seconds, they had neutralized one of the enemy ships. No explosions, no flashy attacks, just a precise strike that took out its systems with terrifying efficiency. Garik stood frozen for a moment, watching as the humans handled their opponents with cold, deliberate actions. They didn't fight for glory. They didn't fight to show dominance. They simply fought to win.
No pride, no boastfulness.
They were like shadows, slipping between the chaos of battle with a quiet, chilling purpose. Rhea, Garik muttered under his breath as the human sergeant appeared in front of him. What is this? How did you? She looked at him with a calmness that sent a shiver down Garik's spine. It's simple, Garik. We don't fight like you do. We don't fight for honor. We fight to win. And winning doesn't require rushing into the fray. It requires patience. Patience. The word echoed in Garik's mind. He had never known such a concept in the heat of battle. His people, the Tarak, had always fought with raw power. They had always believed that dominance on the battlefield was a reflection of their strength. But now, Garik stood face to face with the truth of it. The humans fought with something more. They fought with control, with intelligence, and most importantly, with the understanding that victory didn't require superiority. It required efficiency. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. The Tarak had been on the verge of defeat, but the humans had turned the tide, not through force, but through strategy. Garik stood among the wreckage of the battle, staring at Rhea and her team as they silently tended to their ship, making repairs and ensuring everything was in order. Their movements were precise, calculated. There was no victory dance, no boisterous shouting. They simply did what needed to be done, and then they moved on. The rest of the crew stood in stunned silence, staring at the humans as if they had seen them for the first time. Garik felt the weight of his arrogance slowly shifting. The battle had shown him something he couldn't deny. Strength, true strength, didn't lie in raw power. It lay in the ability to control, to manipulate the chaos of battle without ever losing sight of the goal. Garik's respect for the humans grew that day, not because they had defeated their enemies, but because they had done so with wisdom and precision. And for the first time in his life, Garik understood what it meant to be a true warrior. As they continued their journey through the stars, Garik sat in quiet reflection, his mind replaying the events over and over. He had always believed that victory came through sheer power, through overwhelming force. But now, he understood that there was something far more dangerous than strength. Something the humans had shown him. He turned to Rhea, his voice low but filled with a new sense of respect. You didn't fight like us. Why? Rhea's response was simple, but it resonated deeply within him. We don't need to. The war is already over. We just make sure we win. As Garik thought about her words, he realized that the greatest weapon in the galaxy wasn't brute strength, but the ability to anticipate and control the flow of battle. And perhaps, in the quiet spaces of the endurance, he had learned a lesson that would forever change the way he viewed the universe. Let's expand the story and further develop the plot with additional connectivity, twists, and deeper layers of warfare, wisdom, and tension. The human strategy will continue to shape the events, and Garik's character transformation will be at the forefront. I'll focus on weaving mystery into the narrative, including horror elements that keep the audience on edge. Garik couldn't stop thinking about the humans, even as the Endurance sailed toward its next destination. Each battle, each conflict he had fought had always been defined by brute force, by overwhelming an enemy with superior strength. But now he was confronting an uncomfortable truth. The humans had turned the tide in ways he couldn't understand. Where once there had been chaos, there was now precision. Where there had been raw strength, there was now intelligence. In the days that followed, Garik's respect for the humans grew, but so did his frustration. Every time he saw them sit quietly at the back of the ship, his mind would wander. They didn't seem concerned with the same things the Tarak cared about. They didn't shout, they didn't boast. They just waited. And Garik couldn't help but wonder, what were they waiting for? The next mission was different. They had arrived at a new world, a lifeless planet orbiting a dying star. Their objective was simple: extract vital resources from the surface, ensure the inhabitants were evacuated, and move on. But something felt off about this planet. The atmosphere was thick with a strange, unsettling energy. The crew of the Endurance sensed it immediately. It was as though the planet itself was alive, but not in a way they could understand. Garik stood on the bridge, staring out at the barren world below. His hand gripped the armrest of his chair, his knuckles white. This place, it feels wrong, like something is watching us. Rhea, standing across from him, glanced at the view outside. Don't worry, We've faced worse. We'll get in, get the job done, and get out. But Garik wasn't so sure. The quiet of the ship, the eerie hum of the engines, and the distant, flickering lights from the surface all felt wrong. The planet didn't look abandoned. It looked waiting for something. The descent to the surface of the planet was smooth at first, but Garik's unease grew as they neared the planet's surface. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was drawing them in, pulling them toward the unknown. As the Endurance landed, the air inside the ship grew thick, as if the atmosphere was somehow pressing down on them. "Something's wrong," Garik muttered as he tightened his grip on his weapon. "This place doesn't feel natural." Rhea, ever calm, turned toward him. "The universe is full of strange places, Garik. But that doesn't mean we can't handle it." The rest of the team disembarked, each warrior moving with the efficiency expected of the Tarak forces. But Garik, despite his experience, couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. The ground beneath their feet was soft, almost spongy, as if it were alive. As they ventured deeper into the desolate landscape, the team's communications began to glitch, cutting in and out. The eerie silence around them was broken only by the sound of their footsteps and the occasional crackling of static. But then, a strange sound, a low, vibrating hum, began to reverberate from beneath the ground. Garik's eyes widened. He felt it. The ground was pulsing, as though something deep below the surface was alive, awakening. "Do you hear that?" Garik whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing noise. Rhea paused, her eyes narrowing. "Something's coming." Suddenly, the ground erupted. The surface cracked open with a deafening roar, and out of the depths emerged a creature unlike anything Garik had ever seen. Its massive, slithering form emerged from the ground, its body made of a strange, living metal that shimmered with an unholy glow. Its eyes were dark voids, and it exuded an aura of ancient, unspeakable power. The creature moved with the fluidity of water, its tendrils reaching out to ensnare anything in its path. The Tarak warriors immediately charged forward, but their weapons seemed to have little effect on the creature. It absorbed the blasts of energy with ease, its body rippling as if it were part of the planet itself. The Tarak fought with everything they had, but Garik could sense the fear growing within them. For the first time in his life, they were facing an enemy they couldn't overpower with sheer strength. Rhea, standing at the rear of the group, didn't flinch. She raised her hand, signaling to her team. "Fall back," she said calmly. "We need a new strategy." The humans didn't engage the creature with force. Instead, they observed it. Rhea's eyes never left the creature, analyzing its movements, its structure, as if she were memorizing its very essence. Garik's frustration boiled over. "What are you waiting for?" he growled. "It's tearing us apart. We need to fight back." But Rhea didn't answer. She continued to observe, her mind racing as she calculated their next move. "We're not fighting it, Garik. We're learning it." Suddenly, with a sharp, precise motion, Rhea threw a small device at the creature. It detonated in a burst of light, but the creature barely reacted. Instead, it began to churn and twist, its body thrashing in a rhythmic pattern. The ground shook, the air around them vibrating with energy as the creature's form began to crack open. Rhea turned to Garik. "We've got one shot at this. When it moves, we move. Follow my lead." As Garik watched Rhea's team move with uncanny coordination, he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of awe. The humans weren't fighting the creature. They were controlling it, directing its movements, using its own power against it. For the first time, Garik saw the human's true strength. The creature, now in a moment of vulnerability, opened up its massive, hollow core. Rhea signaled to Garik, her face now a mask of cold determination. "Now," she said. The Tarak warriors, with Rhea leading them, dove toward the creature, using the distraction she had created. They struck at the heart of the creature, their weapons now finding purchase where they hadn't before. Garik's eyes widened as the creature let out a final, horrific scream before collapsing, its metallic body shuddering and falling to the ground with a thunderous crash. The battle was over. The creature was dead, but the victory felt hollow. The silence that followed was deafening, and the eerie hum that had filled the air was gone. In its place was a sense of unease, something Garik couldn't shake. "Rhea," Garik said, his voice low. "What was that? Where did that creature come from? Why did it rise when we landed?" Rhea looked at him, her eyes unreadable. That creature wasn't born from this planet. It was sealed here. It was waiting for someone to awaken it. Garik frowned. Sealed? By whom? Rhea's gaze shifted toward the horizon, where the sky had begun to darken. The ancients. The ones who came before us. They knew something we didn't, and they left behind warnings. Warnings we ignored. Garik's world shifted. The galaxy he had known, one built on the principles of strength, power, and dominance, was suddenly a distant memory. The humans weren't just different. They were the key to something far greater than any of them had realized. They understood the true nature of power, not as something you take, but as something you control. And Garik had just learned the hard way that raw strength wasn't the answer to every problem. Rhea turned to Garik, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. This world was only the beginning, Garik. There are forces in the multiverse far more dangerous than anything we've faced. And now we have to prepare for what's coming. Garik stood silently, the weight of her words sinking in. The fear he had felt earlier was no longer directed at the creature, but at the unknown that lay ahead. For the first time, he didn't feel like the strongest warrior in the galaxy. He felt small, vulnerable as Garik looked up at the horizon. The sky now filled with dark clouds. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Something ancient, something powerful. Something that had been waiting for the humans to arrive. The galaxy's greatest warriors were no longer the Tarak. The humans had become the true masters of the multiverse, not because of their strength, but because of their ability to adapt, to survive, and to understand the true nature of power. Garik took a deep breath. "We're not ready for what's coming next," he whispered, his words lost to the howling winds around them. But Rhea, standing beside him, merely smiled. "We will be."